Welcome everyone to this afternoon's live stream. Today we will be talking about snow removal on the mountaintop. And so I'm here with three of our team members that are critical in that process. So can each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little about your team's role in the snow removal process?
Roger Rothwell, Director of Facilities. I'm in charge of the buildings and the custodial team. We maintain our sidewalks at the visitor center and staff areas at other campuses, primarily.
Hi, and good afternoon. I'm Patrick Estes. I'm the Director of Safety and Security here at Monticello. Our team is made up of 3 different shifts of officers that work 24/7. Our team is always monitoring the weather throughout the year, and when we have inclement weather, our team is the first to advise and notify our inclement weather team that there's inclement weather in the near future, and then that's sort of the first step in getting our inclement weather team together.
And I'm Jason Young. I'm the manager and curator of historic gardens here at Monticello. So myself and my team maintain the gardens and grounds for Monticello, and that's seen areas and unseen areas for the guest experience. And as far as the snow removal goes, my team drives the plow trucks to clear roads, and we also do a majority of the sidewalks and pathways for the mountaintop guest area around the historic home.
Well, how does being situated on a mountain affect the weather, and how does it present unique challenges in inclement weather? We're actually going to show a video to help illustrate this a little bit.
So one of our unique challenges that we have is that we are up on a mountain. So sometimes weather that is occurring in the city of Charlottesville is different than what we're actually getting with the elevation where the house is situated up on the mountaintop. So oftentimes when monitoring the weather, we have to take that into consideration. We might be getting rain down below, and that could actually be freezing precipitation up on top of the mountain. And as you can see in the video, we have a large amount of land surrounding the mountaintop, over 2,500 acres that we're responsible for. So it's not just the mountaintop area that has to be cleared. So we really have a lot more work than just the remote area around the house.
With the snow removal for us, if it is quite a storm event, which can be interesting here on the mountaintop, terrain comes in and plays a factor. We often use chains on 4-wheel drive trucks in order to maintain traction on the steep roads that lead up to the mountaintop. Really, every part of being on a mountain is tough now and would certainly have been interesting in Jefferson's time. Here in the video, my team are using a variety of machines. Here is a rotary brush that we use to clear some of the hard surfaces, so concrete, asphalt, and brick pathways. We can clear with this and get much more efficient clearing than with a plow or anything else. We have a variety of machinery. Here is a snow blower attached to a small tractor called a Vintrac, and these work really well. We have a lot of gravel pathways and pathways that try to mimic possible historic surfaces that would have existed. And so those don't yield well to the brush, and we really tear them up with plows. So having a variety of different equipment really makes it so we can effectively clear the mountaintop. And of course, we love hand shovels. Well, we don't love them, but we use hand shovels quite a bit. Sometimes you just don't have a choice here. In order to open up for guests, we chip through ice that is part of the excitement.
One of our viewers, Chester, was wondering how they would have handled snow removal in Jefferson's time.
Yeah, we were discussing that before we started this, and although Jefferson documented amazing amounts of information in thousands of letters and tons of documents, we really have no information as far as what they did with snow. But they dealt with horses and human-powered traffic, and so really automobiles and guests and modern ideas of safety probably didn't abound back then. And so they might have just dealt with the snow and kept going and went about their lives that were probably hard enough without having to shovel snow as well.
Well, how can you prepare for winter storms?
We've got a lot of infrastructure here at Monticello. When it snows, we have to worry about power outages and preparing for visitors. So preparation is really all year long. It's keeping up with our equipment, keeping up with our generators, keeping up with our tools. And as the weather draws near, we put some ice melt in some areas. We've used brining. We're kind of on our own here on the mountaintop when the weather comes in. So we have to be well prepared, and Patrick kind of leads it up days, even sometimes, close to a week, kind of as we see, checking the weather.
Yeah, and I think the pre-planning starts even months before we get into inclement weather season in the winter time. Our team, meets regularly, make sure that we have the appropriate things in place, so when the weather comes, we can just activate our plan, and we're not trying to figure out on the fly how to work through different situations. So really, a lot of the upfront planning is what makes our team successful in being able to open up safely and having a safe environment for our staff, in addition to our guests. In the picture you can see now, I think it's important to note that the part of a stage is sort of in between the pre-planning and actually the action of clearing all surfaces for guests, is that we have to maintain emergency ingress and egress for emergency vehicles throughout a snowstorm. So once, as we're getting into storms and snow starts accumulating on the ground, it's imperative that our teams are working around the clock, and sometimes that means overnight, running plows on the roads to make sure that we can get emergency vehicles up to the mountaintop once they get off of county roads that might have been cleared already.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about what it looks like up here. Let's talk a little bit more about what it looks like up here when there is a big snow or ice storm. I think we'll have some more photos to help illustrate that as well.
Yeah, so this first picture is the east front of the house with the east walk, and you can't even see the east walk, obviously. So there's brick down there somewhere. So that gives a good picture of where we start when our teams respond. This is what they're responding to, and they're coming from their houses. We have to get them here safely in order to remove the snow, to make sure, again, the emergency access to the building itself is there, and then we start working towards opening up to the public, which expands to all the different paths you saw in the earlier video that surround the house. And then here's a picture on the west lawn. This was the same storm. This was the first storm we had this year, where we got, in one of these pictures it shows the depth of the snow on the west lawn. We had over 14 inches of snow on the west lawn, which is a significant amount of snowfall. And I think that is probably more than we saw if you were in the city of Charlottesville. I mean, and that just kind of shows the difference in elevation. We might get a little bit more snow or a little bit different weather up top.
At the entrance here, you can kind of see some of the trees and everything hanging down too. Every storm's a little bit different, and we work in the middle of the woods, so it's kind of interesting when it comes through. That storm that Patrick was talking about started off as rain and switched over to sleet, and that creates a mess of tree branches falling and power outages, and really affects us due to our location, really just kind of in the middle of the woods here.
And as Patrick was talking about, the first and foremost, the goal of my team with pulling, getting snowplows out is emergency access to the house. In order to get vehicles, if we had a fire, if we had something go on, there is only one Monticello, right? And so that is our ultimate goal in that first stages of the storm, is to maintain the safety and security of the home. Patrick does a good job as far as bringing everybody in. We have cots and food. He does a great job making it so as a team we can maintain here for quite some time. Roger, as he said, a lot of equipment, and we have a lot of generators. This last storm we had, right, 5 days, 6 days without power. And so being able to be self-sufficient is quite an obstacle.
So part of our pre-planning is making sure that all of our essential staff that are required to come in to help with the snow removal operations and maintaining that access is to make sure we have a plan to get them here and get them here in time to where they can they can safely navigate from their house to property. And then like Jason was saying, we have accommodations here on property to house and feed the staff that are working. In this last storm, there were a couple cases where we had groups of staff that stayed overnight. They worked a full shift, stayed overnight, and then continued to work the next day. So that's sort of how we manage that. And with that, we set up, part of our pre-planning is once we go into an incident, we set up an emergency operations center down in our visitor center, which serves as a central hub for communication and information passing from teams. And it truly integrates all three of our teams and other departments as well to make sure that we're all operating off of the same information and then working collaboratively to get through the incident safely.
Here you can see that not only are we plowing, but also we have to be ready. We have heavy equipment on the mountaintop, so we have tractors and backhoes and things like that. Here a lot of this storm, luckily we were driving around with chainsaws and the plow trucks. Big trees were smashing just like everywhere else in Charlottesville and the surrounding area. In order to keep working, you got out, you removed the tree, and then you pushed it out of the way, either with machinery, and then we kept plowing. And you just don't, this is really where the emergency egress and access comes in. If we're not ready and there's huge trees across the road, it could be dire, right?
Yeah, and in this picture, again, this was the first storm of the year, and this was early on in the storm. Snow was still, it's hard, it might not be able to see it in the picture, but snow was actively falling. We had tree branches falling, and in the picture, that's Jason and his team trying to clear, that's our exit road. And we had staff that were, some of my overnight staff were trying to leave their shift, and the road conditions were unsafe. So we actually made the decision to keep them on property. So we're bringing them back on property. And just in trying to do that, we had downed trees across the roadway, which had to be dealt with. But this is just this is a great example of the teamwork that it takes in these incidents, across the departments working together to make sure that everyone can accomplish their goals.
You can see here, I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people don't know for Monticello, we operate like a little city, and Roger does a lot of that. We're spread out, as Patrick said, across 2,500 acres. And so being able to maintain the facilities and keep the lights on and keep everything running, it's quite a task, especially when weather makes it more complicated. And sometimes there's a lot of weather.
I believe this is the 2010 storm.
2010 storm, yeah. Snowpocalypse.
Luckily, none of us were here.
That's right, yeah. It was a bad one, right? There you go, shoveling out pathways as far as you can go. So,
And once we've maintained that emergency access, snow stopped falling, we sort of transition into gearing up for the public to return to property. And doing that, this year, we tapped into other departments that had some staff come into property and help us snow shovel. So it's not just our teams. We have other departments that are willing to come in, help out. So the coordination of bringing those staff in and getting them to assigned areas to help in a coordinated effort. As you can see, there's a lot of paths, and that's a lot of snow.
We had a few viewer questions come in. Natalia wonders if you use salt to remove the snow, and if so, does that affect the gardens at all?
Please tell us, Jason.
Yes. It is a balancing act. In order to open for the gardens, in order to open for guests, we are always trying to make it as safe as possible. And Patrick's job is to make it as safe as possible, and then my job is to try to protect the trees and the plants. And so sometimes we don't necessarily, we do the best we can to protect the gardens, but also open safely for guests on a regular basis. So we do use it, but we use it as light as possible.
In the Gardens and Grounds department.
In the Gardens and Grounds department.
The buildings department.
Others use it more, but around the historic landscape, we really try to limit the impact to everything we do, because we only have one, and it is hard to get anything back, right? Archaeological concerns with the soil, and so there's a lot of factors.
Another viewer wants to know how you remove snow from the rooftops.
We let it melt.
We typically let it melt. In some areas, we actually do have to shut down where visitors come close, because it comes off at times. And so we'll shut down sidewalks, and there's some snow cleats on a lot of our roofs to help keep people safe. But yeah, we typically, sometimes in some areas, it's like roofs, we let nature kind of take its course, and eventually it goes away in warmer days.
Yeah, we've pre-identified several areas that we know are open to the public with overhangs where snow could fall, and we preemptively will close those areas as needed. And then our teams all monitor the conditions all around the property to see if there's additional hazards that might be out there.
How do you decide when to close to the public?
That is a great question.
It is a very good question. And it goes back to the planning stages. That's where we start. We have pre-planned responses to different type of incidents. That being said, every storm is different, and it really depends what's coming and what's in the forecast and what's actually occurring here. So our team will meet, sometimes, as Roger mentioned, we'll meet weeks leading up to potential hazardous weather. We monitor the forecast very closely. Our team, again, we monitor the weather daily for our daily operations. And when we're expecting inclement weather, we are monitoring it extremely closely. And we'll even contact the National Weather Service to get feedback from meteorologists to see what our specific area is expecting in some of these storms. And then as we get closer, our team will meet more frequently. And then the day of an event, if we're expecting snow, on a specific day, we'll call a meeting with our inclement weather team, which is a total of 7 people, and we'll meet at 6 a.m. in the morning to discuss the current conditions and the forecast for the near future. And sometimes we're able to make an early decision if there's any operational changes to our hours or to our staff hours. But again, since it's sort of a moving target on what we might actually get, there are times where we just monitor it throughout the day. And then our team will convene if we need to make an adjustments in the middle of the day during operating hours. And then our team makes a recommendation, to keep regular hours, close early, or if there's ever a need to close in advance and change to just a full closure, then that recommendation goes to the president, and then that's where the ultimate decision lies.
What is your primary concern when a big snowstorm hits Monticello?
Be 3 different answers here.
I'll kick it off because this is what drives a lot of our decisions because it's the most important, and it's safety. That's our number one driving factor when it comes to making decisions related to inclement weather. And my team's job on a daily basis is safety and security. So we're constantly monitoring issues that raise concern of safety. And then the hazards that come with winter weather can really be dangerous. So we try to make informed decisions to create the safest environment for both our staff as well as our guests that we're bringing on the property. So, and then additionally, my team is also in charge of security for our property. But that's not really driven by weather. We have to do that regardless of what type of weather we have. So as it relates to making decisions for weather, it's absolutely safety is top priority for me.
Yeah, I would say utilities, and, our structures, power, maintaining power, refueling generators. Our generators have runtime where if you've got a 5-day storm, there's some generators you have to refuel 3 times. And I'm working with these guys. How do I get a fuel truck up to refuel the generator? We operate off our own water system. Basically, we're supplied by the county, but we've got a 200,000 gallon water tank in the mountain beside us that supports our fire hydrants, our fire suppression systems, and it's all run on power. And when you can't get to some locations, it gets very concerning about utilities failing and not being able to support fire suppression systems and utilities of the foundation.
And for me, I'd say it'd be equipment, right? Being ready with either big trucks, heavy snow plows. We have to dig sometimes down use a backhoe or something to dig down a road that normally you wouldn't take anything down unless it's a summertime, nice day, in order to get access to the 200,000 gallon tank, the last storm we had. So being prepared and across the board, no matter what type of equipment we operate on a mountain and it throws everything at us. So just being ready and prepared.
Yeah, and then lastly, I'd like to just mention that all of the staff from our various departments that have these essential duties that we have to maintain during weather, we also, as managers, have to make sure that our staff are working in safe conditions. So we have a variety of different ways to make sure that we are safely operating when our staff are here. And really, it's a team mentality of taking care of each other and working together to safely, get the job done with, consideration of what everyone is out there doing.
We got another viewer question. This one's primarily for Jason. How do you prepare plants to survive through the winter?
We do our best to plant the cold hardy plants. Right now we have kale and cabbages, a lot of the brassicas out in the vegetable garden. The spring flowers that we have in the ground right now are unfortunately got really hit by some of the colder weather we had. And so honestly, a good blanket of snow during the winter is a pretty nice way to keep plants alive. But just planting the proper stuff and preparing for it. We also do a lot of work in our trees surrounding the house. We have steel cables that are almost impossible to see that support those trees when they're heavily loaded, because a lot of the landscape kind of makes the location. And so saving those trees and saving the landscape as best as possible and preparing it for snow loading.
Besides Monticello, are there any other properties that need to be cleared?
Yes, there are quite a few. So in our pre-planning and our organization of our team, we have a list of priorities for all of our properties. And it's broken down into roadways, driveways, pathways, specific buildings. And like I mentioned earlier, we have over 2,500 acres of property and all the different buildings that are spread out throughout all the properties. We have to prioritize how we clear each one of them. So It starts with emergency ingress and egress to specific properties. If there's on-site housing, those are obviously a higher priority than an unoccupied office building where someone might not be coming in for a day. And then we break it down into after we've gotten through a storm and we've maintained emergency access, then we start moving to the next tier that would be for opening up for guests, and then work into the office spaces with that as well. And I don't know, Roger might be able to answer how the number of properties. I don't know what the number of buildings we have, but
we've got
spread out.
Yeah, we've got over 50 buildings. Our visitor center alone is 42,000 square feet. We've got a center for historic plants. We've got a library. We've got scholars housing. We've got staff housing. We've got
another mountain across the way.
Another mountain with a very interesting road that goes straight up that I'm sure is very fun for Jason's team to plow. So yeah, we've got a mix of buildings and campuses that we have to take into consideration during all this. It's interesting to keep up with everything while trying to keep up with the main campus, really.
Yeah.
Have there been any snowstorms over the years that have been particularly challenging?
I think everyone's unique. The last storm that we just had that Patrick talked about, that there was 14 inches on the west lawn, was, I think, across the board was a fun one. Patrick, you could probably speak to that the most, right?
Yeah, I mean, that storm brought a lot of challenges because as we were looking at the pictures, and Roger mentioned it started out as rain and then we had snow sticking to trees. So we're dealing with 14 inches of snow, but we also had, trees bending over, covering our roadways, which caused a lot of trees and branches to fall, which created, issues with power. So we sort of had like multiple concerns going on at one time that had to be dealt with pretty quickly. So it took a lot of quick action by our teams to work through the initial stages of that, and then transition into, how do we open for the public after this massive amount of snow is dumped on us. Plus we have branches down all over the place. And I started last summer, so this is my first winter weather here in Monticello. So we've had a couple good ones so far.
Yeah, and we weren't supposed to get 14 inches. So, and it was the first storm of the year. Usually we get a couple warm up, just kidding, didn't really get anything storms, but this one they were calling for maybe 3 to 5, and then we got 14 inches on the mountain. So yeah, the best planning, it gets interesting. And then inclement weather, I always say, you just never really know until it happens. So that was definitely one of those, for instances.
Yeah, and some of you might remember the week before that storm, around Christmas time, the temperatures were in the 60s. And then a week later, we wound up with 14 inches of snow on the ground. So it is hard to predict, but we prepare for the worst, and that's how we get ready for all of them.
All right, well, thank all three of you for joining us, and I feel safe in speaking for both Monticello staff and guests. Thank you so much for all the work that you and the inclement weather team do for us, especially during the snow season. And thank our audience for joining us today.
Questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us.